back to another episode of Drown Tales. I'm your host Shuchita. Today we will dive deep into the subject of the survival of India's vultures and the battle against drugs that threaten their existence. It is the break of dawn, and as far as the eye can see, are vultures ripping off flesh of dead cattle in the Jorbeed Vulture Conservatory in Bikaner, Rajasthan. The overwhelming stench of dead carcasses makes you sick. A truck drives up and dumps more cattle on the already high pile, and a few people from a local community come down to skin the carcasses to help vultures get to the soft organs of the dead bodies. The locals have to remove the skin because experts say that the red-headed vulture, which is now nearing extinction, is the species that otherwise breaks the skin from the dead animals, has its fill, and leaves the rest for the other species of vultures. But due to the declining population of red-headed vultures, man has to do its job. Home to 9 species of vultures, India is trying its best to ensure that the population of these scavengers stabilizes. If their annual mortality rate surpasses 5%, they edge closer to extinction. Thus, every single vulture death becomes even more tragic. India lost over 90% of its vulture population in the 90s due to contamination of their food, dead animals that were treated with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that proved to be fatal for the birds. In a recent landmark decision, the Union Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has prohibited the manufacture, sale, and distribution of 2 non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, ketoprofen and aceclofenac, as they have been catastrophic to our vulture populations.
This latest ban comes as a result of huge efforts over more than 10 years, both in terms of safety testing of vultures, the publications and advocacy efforts by the vulture conservation community. And that includes the Bombay Natural History Society in particular, the SAVE network, but probably most importantly, the IVRI, the Indian Veterinary Research Institute. So these efforts have led indirectly to Indian government's decision to legislate and ban these drugs from veterinary use.
That was Mr. Chris Bowden, Program Manager at Saving Asia's Vulture from Extinction, SAVE. He has been associated with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds for the last 20 years. He further says,
"One thing that we still need to make sure of is that such a ban is fully implemented and there are no loopholes, and we will be looking at that to make sure that there's no irresponsible use of the drugs pretending to be used for human health instead of for veterinary. But the overwhelming message is huge welcome to this step. Other steps that are still needed for vulture conservation, we're keen that there are releases of the captive birds back to the wild, but without getting these drugs fully under control and checking that it's really safe enough to release them back in the wild, we can't just assume that and move ahead yet. But as Nepal has demonstrated, where these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, these NSAID veterinary drugs and painkillers are really down to very low levels, vulture populations will start increasing again.
But this is not the first time India has banned a veterinary drug to prevent indirect vulture mortalities. In 2006, India banned the use of diclofenac, which was killing vultures in the country. Dr. Vibhu Prakash of Bombay Natural History Society, a name synonymous with vulture conservation in India, tells us more about this ban.
Vultures were very common in our country till mid 80s. We had a estimated population of 4 crore vultures in the country. And suddenly during mid 90s, their population crashed. And we saw a lot of dead vultures. And when we opened them up, we found that they suffered from kidney failure. And because of the kidney failure, the kidney could not excrete out uric acid and it got deposited on the visceral organs. And this is a condition called visceral gout. So now it took us almost 10 years to find out what was killing vultures and what was causing this gout. We looked at all the possible ecological parameters which could have caused crash in vulture population, like food shortage or habitat loss, or uh, uh, because of chemical or pesticide contamination or a disease. So everything we had looked at, but it was difficult to pinpoint what was actually killing it. So the breakthrough came in 2003 when the scientists American scientists were working in Pakistan. They had very similar results as we had in India, that the vultures were dying and they were dying of visceral gout. But additionally, what they found out that all the vultures which had died of visceral gout also had residues of a drug called diclofenac. And diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug which is given to cattle in pain and inflammation. So what they did, they orally fed diclofenac to vultures and also through buffalo meat. And the results were surprising the same, what we were seeing in the white, that vultures died within a week or so, showing symptoms of visceral gout, kidney failure, and dehydration and mortality. So when they found it in Pakistan that diclofenac was killing it, we in India, we had collected vulture tissues from across the country and stored them at Pinjore in Vulture Conservation Breeding Center, Pinjore. And so when we looked at tissue samples from India, we found that 76% of the vultures had died of uh, visceral gout. And all the vultures which had died of visceral gout also had residues of diclofenac. So it was a very clear indication that diclofenac was indeed killing vultures. So we also did a survey to find out, how much diclofenac is available, which can cause this kind of crash. And we found that 10% of the carcasses which are available to vultures for foraging had diclofenac residues in them. And in fact, you need just less than 0.8% of the carcasses to have diclofenac, which could have caused crash in vulture population to the extent of about 99%. So, what happens is diclofenac causes kidney failure. Kidney cannot excrete out uric acid, gets deposited in visceral organs. And kidney also filters water and absorbs water. But since there's a kidney failure, they cannot absorb water and vultures die of extreme dehydration. Subsequently, we safety tested another drug called ketoprofen and also a drug called aceclofenac. And ketoprofen, in fact, we could not test in India. It was tested in South Africa on species which are very close to vultures, to our vultures, white-backed, long-billed, and slender. That's called the African white-backed vulture. And African vulture, white-backed vulture, when it was given diclofenac, it died showing similar symptoms. But when it was given meloxicam, it didn't die, and meloxicam was safe. But when ketoprofen was given to it, it died showing similar symptoms. So we knew that ketoprofen also kills vultures. And aceclofenac, it's a prodrug of diclofenac. That is, if you inject aceclofenac in human body or in animal body, it gets converted within a couple of hours in diclofenac. So it has the same toxicity or more than diclofenac because it stays in the body for a longer period of time. So it was also causing mortality. And then finally, its pharmacokinetics was studied in South Africa and also by Indian Veterinary Research Institute in India in collaboration with Vulture Conservation Breeding Center, Pinjore. And it was found that the drug was being converted into aceclofenac. So when these two drugs were found to be toxic, we approached the government of India again and requested them to ban these drugs. But as you rightly said, it took a lot of time in banning these drugs because, these drugs was not originally patented for vultures and nobody actually does safety testing on wild species. It is all usually done on, either rats or domesticated species, lab animals and all that. And nobody had really thought of that a pharmaceutical can cause this kind of crash in population of wild species. So, in fact, we approached Government of India through Haryana Forest Department also and through UP Forest Department also. And and we started it in 2016-17. So they did discuss this in their technical committee, and there were questions and they were answered and all. So procedure is long, and since it was the drug was for cattle, use of cattle, and it is these drugs are effective in cattle. So it that's why probably it took time for the drug controller to decide to ban these drugs. Although it's not very good for vultures because cyclophenac, in fact, is as I told you, is as dangerous as diclofenac to vultures. So its presence in the market is certainly not uh, good for vulture conservation.
Apart from these banned drugs, there are other nascent drugs, especially nimesulide, which also poses a grave threat to vultures when ingested.
We have found that there is another drug called nimesulide, which has also been safety tested, and we have found that it is very toxic to vultures and kills vultures, causing the same sort of problem. It causes kidney failure, and vultures die out visceral gout. So this also need to be banned as quickly as possible. I think Government of India, it has been Government of India is considering it. The Drug Controller General has discussed this also in technical committee. Hopefully, this will be also be banned, and vultures will probably will save.
While indirect mortalities were the biggest threats to the vulture population in India, there are few other threats that pose a risk to the vulture population in the country.
Other threats, of course, that vultures face worldwide as well as here, that's what we call poison baits, is a particularly worrying one where people are trying to poison other carnivores, dogs or leopards or other things, and accidentally killing vultures in the process of putting out poisons. And that's a really devastating has a devastating impact and can kill a lot of vultures in a short space of time. And that needs to be absolutely brought under control and serious measures taken to prevent that. Power infrastructure can pose threats to the birds. They will collide with electric wires and get electrocuted. Where wires are placed close to food sources, but it's actually pylon design which is probably more of a threat. And increasingly wind farms can be a problem if they're not sited in the right place with respect to where vultures regularly occur. But these other threats are secondary to the veterinary drugs even now here in India. So again, these latest moves by the Indian government really are very, very welcome.
Well, Dr. Prakash says that efforts have borne results and the vultures will not go extinct as India is undertaking captive breeding of vultures at the Vulture Conservation Breeding Center in Pinjore.
Conservation breeding program is very successful, and we have released some vultures in the wild, this center at Pinjore and Rajabad Khao in West Bengal. But reintroduction is a process itself. It's not that you remove the drugs from the system and then you can release all the birds. So what happens is you have to release birds in a phased manner. First, making sure that when you are releasing birds in a 100 kilometers radius, there is very little prevalence of the drug. There's food available. There no other threat to vultures and all. And when you release captive bred vultures in the wild, the birds which are kept in captivity, they take 2-3 years to get used to the wilderness, start finding the food, and then their survival rate becomes. So you should release them in an area where you can monitor them, and you should release them initially, all of them with a tracking device. So tracking device, the advantage is you can always know where your bird is, and if it's not fed or there's a problem, you can go and either provide food or bring it back You treat it and send it back again. Or and if it dies, you can find out the carcasses, which are not easy to find otherwise, and find out the cause of mortality. So reintroduction will be very interesting, but we should be done very systematically.
We need to get rid of these remaining threats too, to ensure that when the captive bred vultures are released into the wild, they get a safe environment to thrive. Thank you, Dr. Prakash and Mr. Bowden, for enlightening us on this very important subject. By saving our vultures, we are preserving the health and balance of our environment. Thank you for joining us on Ground Tales. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.